It is a very sad fact that authoritarianism is advancing everywhere, including Europe. And our next speaker is a surprise addition to our program. He too experienced politically motivated prosecution and imprisonment, and only a few days ago, he was permitted to leave his country to join us in person on this stage. Please give a very loud and warm welcome to Zurab Japaridze, a libertarian politician from Georgia.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear friends, thank you very much for this opportunity, and it's a great privilege to be here to speak in front of you. I'm really grateful for your time, for your attention, and most importantly, for your commitment to the values we share, freedom, dignity, human rights. My name is Zurab Japaridze, as it was already mentioned. I'm a politician from Georgia, a country that some of you I know visited maybe several times, but for many of you, maybe a country just a name on the map. But it is a country that I assure you has always stood at the crossroads of the history. About 10 years ago, I started the Classical Liberal Party in Georgia, and since then, for many years, we used to fight for lower taxes, less regulations, for smaller size of the government, for free trade, and things like that. And whenever I was invited to such events, I used to talk about these kind of issues. But today I want to make some different points. But let me start with my country. Georgia is a small nation, but it carries an extraordinary legacy. It is one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on the earth. It is widely recognized as the birthplace of wine, maybe many of you don't know, with an 8,000-year-old tradition of winemaking. It has its own unique alphabet, one of only a handful in existence, and above all, it has a deeply rooted culture built on resilience, identity, and unwavering attachment to freedom. For centuries, Georgia has stood at the intersection of empires, Persian, Ottoman, Russian, yet it has preserved its identity and its aspiration to belong to the Western civilization. This choice was made a long time ago, and it continues to define us Georgians today. But historical choice is not just something we inherit, it is something we must constantly defend. And Georgia emerged from the collapse of the Soviet Union with a clear ambition to become a free, democratic, Western-type state. After decades of authoritarian rule, we began to build institutions based on liberty and rule of law. It was difficult, but we tried. Between 2004 and 2012, Georgia underwent a period of profound, I call it classical liberal reforms. We abolished lots of taxes, from 23 taxes down to 5 taxes. We reduced tax rates. We abolished about 2/3 of government permits and licenses. We abolished lots of state regulations. We has reduced corruption, obviously. We opened up the economy, and basically by doing all this stuff, we expanded individual freedom. We were not perfect. Of course, there were mistakes, but we are moving into right direction. But today, unfortunately, the trajectory has reversed, and Georgia is experiencing a clear and alarming democratic backsliding. This is not just my opinion. It is reflected in the assessment of our international partners. There are many authoritative watchdogs and international bodies, including European Parliament, that has repeatedly expressed deep concerns about the erosion of democracy, rule of law, and human rights in my country. Recent resolutions describe a state where democratic institutions are being systematically weakened, where power is increasingly concentrated, basically in the hands of one guy. We call him an oligarch, Ivanishvili, who made his fortune back in 90s in Russia, and then came to power in Georgia back in 2012, promising to build a democracy unseen in the European continent. The recent findings of one of the prominent investigative mechanism. It's called OSCE mechanism. Paint an even darker picture. They document credible allegations of excessive use of force by the authorities, ill treatment, and even torture. In November and December 2024, more than 500 young people were brutally beaten and tortured on the main avenue of Tbilisi. The police, if you can call them police, prepared special minivans, removed all the seats from inside, and they've been locking young people inside the minivans, poisoning them with tear gas and paper sprays, and then beating them up inside the minivan without windows so that no one could take a video of it. These were not criminals, these were just regular citizens, young students, young professionals standing peacefully demanding their rights and most importantly their right to free and fair election. And to this day, not a single perpetrator who organized this or take part in this beating and torture have been accountable. At the same time, the authorities have introduced a cascade of repressive legislation aimed at silencing civil society, restricting independent media, and limiting the ability of opposition parties to function. And freedom of assembly is constantly under attack, and freedom of speech is under pressure. Today, there are more than 125 political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in Georgia. I never thought that I would have to say this. If you asked me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we would get to this point. I would not believe this, but this is the reality. We have political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in Georgia. Among them are prominent politicians like Elena Khoshtaria, Nika Melia, Reman Khabeishvili, and even the former president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili. Alongside them, a prominent journalist, recipient of Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought, Zia Maglobeli, is also in prison for trying to defend her dignity and for professional honor. These are not just isolated cases, this is a pattern, and the situation is unfortunately worsening. Opposition leaders, including myself, are now facing new criminal charges. It was just said that I was just out of prison, but there are some new charges against all of us, some of which carry sentences of up to 15 years in prison. At the same time, all major opposition parties are under immediate threat of being banned altogether. There is a case submitted by the authorities to the Constitutional Court, and they might ban all the major opposition parties in Georgia. So this is not just democratic backsliding, this is a systematic dismantling of political pluralism in the country. And yes, it is also personal. Throughout these years, I have been attacked physically multiple times. My brother was ambushed at his apartment building by 6 people in masks and beaten up with metal sticks so that he was hospitalized. There are lots of political leaders who were ambushed and beaten up, lots of civil society leaders who had the same fate. I myself spent 7 months in prison, not for committing any crime, but just for not appearing in front of the some kind of a commission set up in the so-called parliament, because I just refuse to recognize the democratic legitimacy of the parliament that I believe do not represent the will of the people. But let me be more clear, this is not a story about me, about politicians. This is a story about Georgia, my country, and about Georgian people. It's a story about a nation that, despite everything I have just described, refuses to surrender its freedom. For more than 500 consecutive days now, people in Georgia have been protesting non-stop in several cities, including the capital, Tbilisi. They stand out in the streets day after day, knowing that they may be arrested, fined, beaten up, or imprisoned simply for just standing on the pavement. And yes, in Georgia now, just to stand on the sidewalk is punishable by law. It's considered a crime. You might be sent to prison for up to 1 year. But these people continue to protest anyway. This is a story about people who centuries ago made a civilizational choice to be part of the West and who continue to fight for their choice today. And this is a story about people who have been fighting for freedom since the beginning of time and who are still fighting as I speak now, because freedom is not an abstract concept for us. Freedom gives meaning to our lives. Without freedom, everything we do in our life, everything we build, our families, our institutions, our economy, our country, whatever, everything loses meaning. And that is why the Georgian people continues to resist, because they choose life in freedom and in dignity. And today I stand before you not only to describe a problem, but also to remind you of responsibility. The struggle for freedom is never local, and it was mentioned in one of the panels here. It doesn't belong to any country. When freedom is threatened anywhere, it is weakened everywhere. And Georgia is part of Europe, not only geographically, but historically, culturally, and in terms of shared values. It is situated in the Black Sea region, one of the most strategically significant areas for European security. It is a vital crossroads linking Europe to Asia, serving as a key corridor for trade, energy transit, and military access. This region matters greatly for the European security, as the war in Ukraine so amply demonstrates. What happens in Georgia directly shapes the stability, prosperity, and security of the entire continent. The struggle unfolding in the region must no longer be understood as a distant and peripheral. Today, Georgia and Ukraine face forces that challenge the very foundations of freedom: individual liberty, human rights, and democratic governance. The question is stark: will democracy, peace, and freedom prevail, or will authoritarianism, regression, and the use of force dictate the course of the history? Georgia knows the struggle all too well. In 2008, it became the first target when Russia launched a military invasion, testing the limits of international resolve. The response from the world was insufficient, and that lack of decisive pushback emboldened the same revanchist forces. Years later, those forces escalated, first with the annexation of Crimea, and then with a full-scale war against Ukraine. And the pattern is clear. Unchecked aggression does not stop, it expands. And today, both Georgia and Ukraine continue to resist. Ukraine fights a brutal conventional war, defending its land and people against open military invasion. Georgia, meanwhile, faces a different but no less dangerous challenge. It is the target of a sophisticated hybrid campaign, one that blends political pressure, economic leverage, disinformation, and electoral manipulation. This is the modern face of authoritarian influence, less visible than tanks, but deeply corrosive to democratic institutions. Authoritarian regimes have proven highly effective at learning from one another. They share tactics, refine strategies, and support each other in undermining democratic systems. They adapt quickly, exploit weaknesses, and act with coordination and purpose. Liberal democracies, by contrast, have too often been reactive, fragmented, and slow to respond. And that must change. If freedom is to endure, democratic nations must recognize the scale and unity of the challenges they face. They must organize, cooperate, and act with equal determination. What is at stake in Georgia and Ukraine is not confined to their borders. It is about the kind of world we choose to live in, a world where nations and individuals are free to determine their own future, where rights are protected and where power is constrained by law, or a world where might makes right and freedom is an exception rather than a rule. And the fight taking place in Georgia today is part of the broader struggle to defend democratic and liberal values across the world. So your voices matter, your attention matters, and your solidarity matters, because authoritarianism thrives in silence and it retreats in the presence of truth and unity. And let me end with the words of the great defender of freedom, Mario Vargas Llosa. La libertad no es solo un valor más, es la condición que hace posibles todos los demás. Freedom is not just another value. It is the condition that makes all other values possible. And that is exactly why we must defend it, everywhere and always. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Uhrmesi madloba.